WARNO is a real-time tactics video game. Currently, there are only two playable categories: single skirmishes with AI and multiplayer mode. A campaign should be released in the future. From the first deployment, you feel the tension rise as you direct your troops to their objectives. Currently, those objectives are simple: capturing different locations on the map. Each location you take over grants you a certain amount of points, and the first team to reach a set number wins the match. WARNO currently does not give you any kind of tutorial on how to play the game. You are on your own to figure out how the resources and systems work, and all the small functions involved with combat, both ground and air. Even for experienced RTS players, this can be quite frustrating, so if you're new to the RTS genre, I strongly advise holding off until WARNO reaches its final state. The handful of different battlefields playable in WARNO are quite breathtaking for what they are. The landscapes are beautifully detailed as your M1A1 Abrams battle tanks traverse the terrain, and your A-10A Thunderbolt II strikes at the opponent's ground vehicles. Your F-16C Fighting Falcons take off at your command to engage with the enemy's MiG-23 MLs in a dogfight above your ground troops, as your scout teams prowl the forestry across enemy lines, surveying the terrain ahead for hostiles yet unseen. WARNO's meticulous elegance when it comes to military units, vehicles, and aircrafts is extremely enjoyable. The different types available to you are quite impressive in the amount of intricacies spent on each. It shows quite boldly that WARNO is a fanfare to military machinery and design. Set in the World War II era, Battlefield 5 is an intense game that keeps the player on their toes. From its grueling single player to its phenomenal multiplayer, it has everything for a fan of FPS games. Battlefield 5 still has a healthy player base in 2023, making it enjoyable even now. The game has been going strong despite initial controversies and backlash. Battlefield 5 features tons of great maps to choose from. You can be fighting in a snowstorm in one match, then you can choose to go to a desert in the next one. There is a ton of variety to pick from. The maps range from large sizes to smaller ones to accommodate people looking for action-packed matches. Having the option to put up small walls to hide behind was a great idea which should be further expanded upon in the newer games. This keeps the game fresh and makes the gameplay more enjoyable. The buddy system is a great way to ensure squads stick together and take on objectives as a team. It is quite similar to Medal of Honor Warfighter. You actually have an incentive to stick with your squad now, since you can revive teammates even if you are not a medic. Sharing ammo with squad members is extremely easy now that it makes the gameplay more fluent. You don't have to stop and pick up random guns just because you ran out of ammo. You can always ask your squad to give you more. This game had a lot of potential that sadly wasn't utilized correctly, but it is a good foundation for the upcoming Battlefield games. Valiant Hearts: The Great War is one of the most human and sensitive games about war ever released. Set during World War I, the game is more about the personal struggles of its characters than it is about the larger historical details and political realities of the devastating conflict. There's a lot of death in Valiant Hearts, but very little direct violence. Over the course of the game, you play as several characters that aren't traditional action heroes. The older Emil, for instance, has to scramble and struggle a bit to hoist himself over obstacles. And instead of running and gunning their way through the game's side-scrolling stages, characters solve a series of environmental puzzles to proceed. These puzzles cleverly find many different ways to combine simple elements like tossing objects to distract enemies, pulling levers to activate machinery, and issuing commands to your devoted canine companion, Walt, and they're just challenging enough to be engaging and satisfying without being so difficult as to interfere with the story's momentum. Though the mechanics are simple, Valiant Hearts admirably puts you in a wonderful variety of situations, having you do everything from cooking a meal for a high-ranking officer to fighting a boss battle against a zeppelin using a pipe organ as your weapon. The game's storytelling isn't always as cohesive as it should be. Visually beautiful game that deftly moves between moments of joy and moments of tragedy, and ultimately doesn't shy away from the fact that great is just about the last thing any war should be called. Hell Let Loose is a breath of fresh air for gamers of World War II shooters. It is unmistakably a game for adults. It is a contemplative first-person shooter, satisfying the competitive itch in a more thoughtful way than you might be accustomed to. What sets this game apart from others is its pacing, realism, and the extent to which team play and strategic thinking decide the outcome of matches. You play within one of two teams of 50, each led by a commander whose job it is to set an overall strategy, directing and supplying subordinate squads of players accordingly. There are recon squads for sniping, artillery suppression and general nefariousness, tank squads for heavy firepower and anti-tank support. The efficacy of a team depends on each squad performing its role, with each player pulling their weight. Unlike other shooters, where a one-man army can decide an entire game, only teamwork makes the dream work. Get a good commander, an active squad officer, and the full range of roles covered, and you're in for an incredible gameplay experience, even if you lose. The problem is that just a few missing links can ruin a match, and the number of moving parts make it so easy for that to happen. Ineffective recon squads? You'll be hammered into submission by artillery. No or poor commander? The team dissolves into a disorganized rabble. Two squad members doing their own thing? Your squad is too small to push an objective. The complexity of the game, despite making it brilliant, makes it delicate. There is no central story in this war of mine. The game differs from most war-themed video games by focusing on the civilian experience of war rather than frontline combat. What makes this war of mine storytelling excel is its hands-off approach. Everything players learn about a character and the events of the war is entirely driven by their own decisions. Every person players encounter in the game is grappling with the war in their own way, and how players experience that reality is up to them. World building comes from the radio, which provides status updates on the war over broadcast. Survival gameplay in this war of mine is extremely unforgiving. Not only are supplies limited, but players must also manage a small inventory when scavenging. The small stack sizes of key items like wood require players to sacrifice other important materials. Players must also avoid attacks from hostile NPCs and navigate maze-like buildings. All of this is done on a strict timer. This is the core tension of the nighttime scavenging sequences. That tension is what makes nighttime gameplay so engaging. The transition between safe, uninhabited areas and hostile areas is smooth. The core gameplay loop is satisfying. Seeing the shelled-out building the characters squat in become a proper home gives the player hope that characters can come out of this horrific situation unharmed. This war of mine is a strong statement about war delivered through deftly designed stealth survival and resource management. For all players who seek some challenge and are fine with no happy ending, Company of Heroes 3 is a real-time strategy game with new mechanics and modes and is set in the Italian and North African theaters of World War II. There are actually two single-player campaigns in Company of Heroes 3. The larger one is the Italian campaign, a broad, turn-based strategic mode on a large map of central and southern Italy that has you capture territory town by town, with around 25 hours of gameplay. It has theoretically complex systems in which your armies capture towns and ports using deployable air power and naval fleet movements, and build emplacements to defend territory or provide offensive bonuses in battles. It's all very visually similar to the setup of the Total War series. Actual battles that break out when two companies collide or you invade a town are the high point. They're an exciting mixture of skirmishes with dynamic, interjected bonus objectives, shifting modifiers like a fixed force of starting units or specific enemy troops you need to counter. The core of Company of Heroes 3 are the single-player campaigns and the tactical RTS action. Battles are often spectacular in their use of terrain and the series' traditional mix of infantry and armor, and are consistently interesting despite the lackluster AI that loves to blunder its way into an unconvincing defeat. But its campaigns are both wrapped up in big ideas and stories that just don't work out well. Overall, it is a good game, but not the great successor we hoped for. Hearts of Iron 4 is a grand strategy war game set in the World War II era where players can choose to play as any nation that existed during that time period. Basically, this includes the major powers such as the United States, Germany, and the Soviet Union, as well as smaller nations such as Costa Rica and Luxembourg. Players are responsible for managing the economy, military, diplomacy, and politics of their chosen nation, with the ultimate goal of achieving victory in the war. One of the most impressive aspects of Hearts of Iron 4 is the level of detail and historical accuracy. One of the key features of the game is the ability to micromanage your military units and strategy. For example, players can choose to either let the AI handle their military strategy or take control themselves. In addition, players can specify the exact movements and tactics of each unit. This level of control allows players to tailor their military strategy to their strengths and the specific situations they find themselves in. Overall, Hearts of Iron 4 is a deep and engaging grand strategy game that offers a great deal of replayability and the ability to explore histories. The learning curve can be steep, and the AI can be frustrating at times. However, for those willing to put in the time and effort, it is a rewarding and enjoyable game. War Thunder should be familiar to every gamer. After all, the military MMO has been around for almost exactly 10 years. It is free to play, offers an extremely extensive fleet of vehicles, and can entertain players for hundreds of hours and longer. War Thunder takes place on huge battlefields between 32 or 64 participants. These are fought on the ground with tanks, in the air with airplanes and helicopters, and in the oceans with battleships and coastal boats. There are even linked battles in which tanks and aircraft or ships and aircraft can take part at the same time. In total, War Thunder offers around 2,000 different weapons, modeled on historical models from the Second World War, the Cold War, and the modern era. In War Thunder, each game can be played completely differently depending on which type of troops you choose. Over the years, War Thunder has been regularly updated with graphical improvements to ensure that it still looks good in 2023 and also supports technical innovations such as DLSS on the PC. There are also 2 different levels of realism in War Thunder, which is reflected in numerous gameplay aspects. You can play arcade battles, which offer casual gameplay that gives you more guidance and is best suited to relaxed players and beginners. Then there are the realism battles, which are suitable for experts or fans of war simulations. This is where things get really serious, as there are no aiming aids other than the classic cursor. So you need to know how far forward you need to aim to hit a moving target, and should have memorized the tank's weak points in the extra armor analysis mode. Unity of Command 2 is an excellent war game for both new and hardcore strategy fans. It has good mechanics, a fun campaign structure, and it even looks quite good. This is a pure war game. It's about moving troops and tanks and fighting with no consideration for politicking or ceasefires. Every division on the battlefield is made up of sections called steps, each represented by a little dot below the unit's model. Sometimes divisions have specialist steps of attached assets, like a detached tank company temporarily assigned to support an infantry division. Steps are either active, a full circle, or suppressed, an empty one. When a unit attacks or defends, its active steps are multiplied by their combat value, totaled, and compared to the other unit's total for the odds of various results. If that sounds complicated, it's not, because the game just shows you the likely results. Sure, there's a detailed combat resolution table buried in the manual, but you can happily play this quite complex war game without ever looking at it. That feels very good. The basics like combat are easy, but expect some trial and error frustration while you figure out how to reassign steps, balance logistics, juggle command range, and upgrade your divisions. The combat lets you really focus on what an operations scale game does best. This is a game about orchestrating breakthroughs, exploiting gaps with armor, and strategically blocking choke points. Customizable factors like cards and specialists and upgrades lend a lot of flexibility to scenarios and campaigns. World of Tanks is a massively multiplayer online tank-based shooter where players take control of a massive war tank. Players are thrown onto a battlefield with several dozen other players and must navigate the maps and aid their teammates in completing certain objectives, all the while attempting to prevent the other team from completing their objectives. World of Tanks continues to prove its lasting appeal in an increasingly crowded niche of the gaming market. Though World of Tanks has consistently remained one of the most played games in the world throughout the years. World of Tanks has undergone multiple massive changes that have transformed the game both aesthetically as well as mechanically. Since releasing in 2010, World of Tanks has seen a constant stream of updates and patches. Many updates have been minor performance tweaks or bug fixes, but others have been more ambitious, overhauling the game's mechanics and even reworking the game's engine entirely. World of Tanks is a free-to-play tank simulation game that allows players to participate in intense tank battles and engage in strategic warfare from a third-person perspective. The game starts off with quite easy gameplay, but eventuates into a more difficult game as you progress. And because a typical game only takes between 5-10 minutes, the game can get quite intense as well. Unlike other games in World of Tanks, you cannot respawn. So when your tank gets destroyed, and you have to start a new game before you can play again.